I want to begin by telling you about two people. The one is a man who has recently joined our church. I've known him for a long time. He's been in a struggle with cancer for a while, and his cancer is in remission now. And I spoke to him this last week and checked on him, and he said, I said, well, how's your health? And he said, my cancer's in remission. And I said, well, how are your spirits? And he said this: you know, I have decided that you can be miserable and make everyone around you miserable, or you can live the life you have been given as it is. Now look, that is so simple and yet so profound. You can be miserable and make everybody around you miserable, or you can live the life that you've been given as it is. The other person is a man named Tom. It's not me. I'd like to be like this Tom. I'm striving to be like this Tom. And in fact, this sermon series, I'm preaching because I want to be like this Tom. I feel God's called us. Tom has something inside him that I just happened, because I was his pastor, know some of the challenges of his life, and it's not been easy. And yet there is a positive spirit in him, a rejoicing that is both winsome and inspiring. Now, it may be that he's just cut that way, he came out of his mom that way, and that's just the way he is. That's possible. But I think there's something more profound, more significant than that. I think Tom has learned something. I want so much to have that spirit that Tom has. I want to rejoice. We're going to be talking over the next 3 weeks, a very short sermon series, about our attitude. And we're going to look at Philippians 4, and I want to challenge you to do something. Every morning, open your Bible and read Philippians 4. Read it from the beginning to the end. It'll take you 3 minutes. 3 minutes. And think about what it says. Let it speak to your heart. Look at the places that it has imperatives, like today. Rejoice in the Lord, right? And try and practice those things. I believe we can make a change in how we experience life in the world. I think maybe we should have sang Patti LaBelle today. I'm feeling good from my head to my shoes, right? I know I know where I'm going and what I got to do. I've tidied up my point of view. I've got a new attitude, right? You just sing that over your head every day after you read Philippians 4. I've got a new attitude. I have made a decision, as my friend said. I have decided that I'm not going to be miserable anymore. Okay, so let's jump into the scripture, and I want to move through this quickly but it really has basically one point, but it all ties together, and you can follow along inside your sermon notes. First is he begins, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Rejoice. That is a verb. So I've titled this sermon, Claim the Joy. I want you to recognize that that's not really what I ought to be saying. Joy is not a thing we have, it's something we do. Rejoice. Choose to rejoice. It's an action. It's a verb that we take on in ourselves. My friend Tom is in the business of rejoicing. Now, I want to say at the outset that depression, clinical depression, anxiety disorders are diseases. And I'm not talking about those things. I'm not talking about facing clinical depression and facing anxiety disorders where you're just flat all the time or you're just in a knot all the time. People will come to me and say, who's struggling with depression, and I'll say, look, we need to get you into therapy, and we need to get you to see a physician. You can take antidepressants. I've taken antidepressants. They can be life-changing for you. I want to encourage you to do that. And people will say, no, I really think I ought to be able to do this on my own. And I'm like, you wouldn't try and treat diabetes on your own, right? You wouldn't go, I'm just gonna will my sugar level lower. These are chemical changes in your brain, and you need to get treatment. And you need to be in therapy about what the mental patterns have been grooved into your mind that need to change. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what most of us do, which is ride the ups and downs of life like a roller coaster, where we tie our lives to what's going on around us, and when things are going well, we're so happy, we're having a good day, and then the next day we're having a bad day, and then the next day we're having a good day, and then somebody gets mad at us and we're having a bad day, and we ride that roller coaster, and oh my goodness, how many times have I been on that roller coaster? And I want to get off of it. Rejoicing is a verb that says, I am not going to tie myself to that roller coaster anymore. One of my favorite lines from Steel Magnolias is where the Shirley MacLaine character says, I'm not crazy, I've just been in a bad mood for 40 years. Right? I'm talking about you people who have been in a bad mood for 40 years. Okay? It is time to say, I'm not going to be miserable, I'm going to get off of that roller coaster from now on. So he says, rejoice, it's a verb, but then it goes on and it says, in the Lord. Rejoice in the Lord. Look, there are two words that have to do with joy. In English, they sound the same. They're similar. In Greek, they are completely different in the Greek New Testament. One is the word enjoy, right? Enjoy, I'm going to enjoy a good steak. It is about how we deal with our circumstance. And I'm going to tell you that I'm encouraging, we'll talk about that next week. It's not that we don't look at our circumstances at all. We're going to talk about that next week as we look deeper into Philippians. But the other word is rejoice. So enjoy is a transitive verb. Those of you who are grammarians, enjoy is a transitive verb. It has a direct object. You enjoy something. You enjoy a good steak. You enjoy a beautiful day. Rejoice, you don't rejoice something. It's an intransitive verb. It has an indirect object, and the indirect object is in the Lord. Right? Paul says later on, he says in Romans, we rejoice in our suffering. He doesn't say we enjoy our suffering. We don't enjoy our suffering, but in the midst of it, we tie ourselves to something else except our circumstance, so we can rejoice in our suffering. I'm going to use an image that I use with some fear and trepidation, and it's the image of marriage. And the reason I have fear and trepidation about it is I don't want you to hear what I'm saying to be about marriage as much as it is to be about our relationship with Jesus. So Paul uses the image of marriage to describe the way Christ loves the church. And marriage is a representation of that, a sign of that. And so I'm not really speaking about marriage as much as our relationship with God. Paul says, in our marriage service, two people stand in front of God and they say, have you ever noticed how much focus there is on the roller coaster? Right? They say, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. This is what's ahead for you, boys and girls. It's gonna have good times and it's gonna have bad times. And what you're saying is, look, we're gonna stand side by side and we're gonna face all that together. And I'm gonna have you and you're gonna have me, and that's not gonna change. That's a sense of rejoicing in one another. No matter what comes our way, we're going to rejoice. Now, there is a caveat in that one. the caveat at the end, till death do us part. Because then that's a situation where we won't have one another and we'll be separated. So we can't rejoice together. When we choose to rejoice in the Lord, what we're saying is, I'm going to have you, God. I'm going to have you no matter what comes my way, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. You're the one thing that won't leave me. And if I can have that, I can rejoice. I can be sad. You can be sad and have joy. You can be sad and rejoice. You can grieve and rejoice. You can have a roller coaster in your life, but if you can hook to something that is an anchor, a stake, that isn't going to go up and down, that you can count on always being full of love for you no matter what, God in Jesus Christ, then you can even rejoice in your sufferings. Rejoice in the Lord always. He says at the end of verse 5, the very end, he says, let your gentleness be known to all. The Lord is near. It's the Lord is at hand is the literal translation, right there. So here's another way to think about it. The cross has two components, right? There's a vertical component and a horizontal component to the cross. And we often talk about that, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. But what I want you to note is that the vertical axis, the vertical post of the cross, holds up the horizontal one. Right? If you don't have that vertical one right, that horizontal one is going to shake. Rejoicing is that ability to have that relationship with God be the thing that you can count on. So that even in your suffering, even in your difficult times, even when your heart's broken, you can still rejoice in the Lord. Always. Okay, now he goes on. He's not Pollyanna. He recognizes that there is a better, worse, a richer, poorer, a sickness, and in health. He says, have no anxiety about anything, but in everything. So he's talking about what can be the challenges, the obstacles to that rejoicing? Anything and everything. Right? We get some clues in other places in the chapter. And, you don't have that in front of you, but let me share some of them with you. In verse 2, I urge Euodia and I urge Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. Conflict. Conflict can eat you up, right? And all of a sudden that challenge pulls you away from your attention on that vertical axis, and you find yourself, goes on, yes, and I ask you, my loyal companion, to help these women, for they have struggled beside me in the work of the gospel. Exhaustion, loneliness, a feeling of isolation. I'm the only one. Get that feeling inside you, and it's hard to rejoice. Near the end, you Philippians indeed know that in the early days of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you alone. I was in financial need. That can yank you away. Anything and everything. That's life. And it takes a discipline. It takes a practice not to let your head be yanked around by the things that are happening around you, and instead to be able to find that relationship, that to be able to rejoice in the Lord in every circumstance. Sometimes it's not everything, not anything and everything, but it's nothing. Somebody explained to me the difference between fear and anxiety the other day, and it was like, aha, I get that. Fear is of something that's actually there. I'm afraid of a tiger. I'm afraid of the elephant, right? I may be afraid of the bill collector. But anxiety is about something that might be and might not be. Sometimes when you have anxiety, you don't even know what it is that's making that pit in your stomach, right? You get up and you put your feet on the floor and you go, God, man, what is the deal? Everything's okay. What is my problem? You ever have that feeling? So it's anything and everything and nothing. When we choose to rejoice, though, we refuse to let those things turn our heads. And we practice rejoicing. Paul's pretty clear about it, isn't he? When he talks about everything and anything and everything and nothing. What shall separate us from the love of God? Well, let's do the specifics. Will hardship or distress or persecution or famine or peril or nakedness or sword? No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am sure that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation, not better or worse, not sickness, not health, not richer, not poorer, will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus. As long as I have Jesus Christ in my life and am in love with him and know he's in love with me, I can handle anything that comes my way. That's the vertical access. Now, I'm just like Paul in the sense that I say, not that I have already obtained this, but one thing I do. I press forward to make it my own. I want to take hold of that. I want to learn that practice of rejoicing always. So what do we do with those obstacles, those challenges? In everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, make your requests be made known to God. Now remember, prayer is not going to, you're not going to pray away your problems. I want you to understand what I'm saying here. I'm not saying that if you're having financial difficulties, keep spending that money and just pray. Right? That just doesn't make sense. You're not going to pray, but here's what you are going to do. The purpose of prayer is intimacy and partnership with God. And if the solution to that anything and everything is to hold fast to that relationship. Some of you may have been through incredible difficulties in a marriage. And you go to counseling, and what the therapist tells you in the midst of the stress of the difficulties in the external part of life, man, you got to work on your marriage. You got to hang in there. You got to spend your energy focusing on that relationship, because if you don't, it'll destroy you. What Paul's saying is, in the midst of all these difficulties, in everything, you pray, because you've got to hold on to that relationship with Jesus Christ in the midst of everything. So the promise is that the God of peace will be with you. Promise is not that life will all go swell. The promise is not that all the problems will go away, that you'll get rich. The issue is not that all of a sudden everything will feel good. But there will be that sense of being able to rejoice in all circumstances. The God of peace will be with you. Peace that passes under, peace that's illogical if you look at the circumstances around you. Amy Simpson, who's the pastor at Riverside Church in New York City, pointed me to a great, one of the old podcasts of This American Life from about a year ago. And it told just a magnificent story. Just before the Second World War, the Japanese had invaded China, Manchuria. And there were a number of missionaries there, and their children were in a school there. They were from all over the world. They were expatriates that were all living in China at that time, and the kids all went to school. And the day after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese soldiers came in and captured all of those children, and they took them to a concentration camp, a prison camp. Actually, it was a prison camp for the first year and a half, and then after that, they took them to a much worse place. And they were there for 4 years total over those 4 years. Now, the teachers went with them. The parents got arrested at other places and other times and went other places, But the teachers and the children all went to the same place. And most of them were girls. I'm not sure why that is at that time. I don't know if there was a boys' school someplace else. And while they were in the prison camp, so many of these girls and their teachers were part of an organization called the Girl Guides. Now, you may be familiar with the Girl Guides. They were the predecessor of the Girl Scouts. And the leaders of the Girl Guides were called the Brown Owls. And many of these teachers were brown owls. This was the motto of the Girl Guides. A Girl Guide smiles and sings under all difficulties. A Girl Guide smiles and sings under all difficulties. Well, there was a woman named Mary Previtt who is 84, or at least was last year when they had the American Life, and she was alive still then. I'm not sure if she is now. And they interviewed her. She was in the camp. And she talked about what the brown owls were like. She said, I want to read you this quote because it just spoke to me. So you're eating some kind of glop out of maybe boiled animal grain. Broom corn that the Chinese fed to their animals was often what the Japanese fed us. And you're eating it out of a soap dish or a tin can. And here comes Miss Stark up behind us, one of our teachers. Mary Taylor, do not slouch over your food while you are eating. Do not talk while you have food in your mouth, and there are not two sets of manners, one set of manners for the princesses at Buckingham Palace, and another set of manners for the Waiheisen concentration camp. Wow. You're not going to give up on who you are because of your circumstance. And they worked hard on smiling and singing. They sang songs like, "Day is done, gone the sun, from the sea, from the hills, from the sky. All is well, safely rest, God is nigh." She tells that as they walked from one camp and they were marched to the Waiheisen concentration camp, which was the second more horrific camp that they went to, they sang a song from Psalm 46, a prayer. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. Some of you in this room are at the top of the roller coaster, and others are at the very bottom, and others have whole mixed bags. But you can always rejoice in the Lord. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say, rejoice.